Let's drill into a specific tax that's gotten a lot of attention recently, a tariff. A tax on goods imported into a country. First, it's important to understand why countries trade with each other, because of comparative advantage. The same reason you don't do everything for yourself. You let someone else build your car, your smartphone, and grow your food. It's the same for countries. There are gains from trade. And those expand the production possibilities frontier. Let's analyze a tariff on steel using our basic supply and demand framework. Let's start with the price of steel on the y-axis and tons of steel, the quantity, on the x-axis. We'll draw a downward sloping demand curve for steel in America and an upward sloping supply curve for steel made by American producers. An analysis without international trade, which is called autarky, and that's just a fancy way of saying no trade, would stop there with an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. But what if there is international trade? Then we have to consider the world price of steel. It's going to be lower than the price of steel in the US because otherwise the US wouldn't import any steel. It would export steel. And in 2018, America imported 31 million tons of steel. We're going to make one simplifying assumption, that the US can buy as much steel as it wants from the world without affecting the price. The analysis doesn't change all that much if we relax that assumption, and things are easier if we make it. So let's draw a line for the world price below the no autarky equilibrium. And this right here is the world price. If American consumers can buy steel at this world price, they'll demand QD, and I'm going to mark that FT for free trade. And American producers at that price will want to supply QS FT. The difference is imports, the amount of steel that's coming from the rest of the world. Now, what happens when a tariff is introduced? A tariff is a tax, so the world price will shift up by the amount of the tax. Let's call that T. World price plus the tariff. At this higher price, American consumers will want Q sub D, T for tariff, and American producers will supply Q sub S, T, again for tariffs. Imports fall from this amount to this amount. So who's better off and who's worse off? Producer surplus, remember, is the benefit to producers, or the difference between the price that they're willing to sell at, which is determined by the supply curve, and the price they can sell at, which is the price. So before the tariff, that's the area here, the difference between the world price and the supply curve. The price has gone up, so American producers are better off by this amount right here. The difference between the old price and the new price bound by the supply curve. But consumers are worse off. By how much? Remember that consumer surplus is the difference between what consumers are willing to pay, determined by the demand curve, and what they had to pay, determined by the price. So at this new higher price, consumer surplus falls, let me label these sections right here, consumer surplus falls by this entire area right here, A plus B plus C plus D. Before, it was the area between the demand curve and the world price, and now it's the area between the demand curve and the new higher price. A plus B plus C plus D is the loss of consumer surplus, and it's obviously much more than the gains to producers. Now, as you'll remember from the lectures on tax incidence, there are some more pieces here. The tariff generates revenues for the government in the amount of the new level of imports times the amount of the tax, and that's this rectangle here, C. So producer surplus goes up by area A. Consumer surplus falls by A plus B plus C plus D, and government revenue, GR for government revenue, goes up by C. So that leaves a deadweight loss of B plus D. That's deadweight loss. American consumers are forced to buy steel at higher prices than the market equilibrium with free trade, and so there are productive exchanges that never happen. That's deadweight loss, and total welfare is reduced. Notice, too, that the entire incidence of the tariff falls on American consumers. Foreign producers get the same world price as they did before. This world price right here, Americans pay the entire tariff T. And careful economic research tends to confirm that finding. Now, tariffs are usually justified as protecting American industries and the people that they employ, but it's an extremely expensive way to do it. Most estimates of how much extra consumers pay per job saved in the US are in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars per job. Now, reliable estimates of the cost to Americans of each job saved in the steel industry from the 2018 tariffs on steel is around $900,000. But it gets worse. Keep in mind that steel is an input into production for many American industries: cars, washing machines, airplanes, and so on. As we'll see in Module 9, when we consider the problem of the firm, an increase in the price of an input means that a firm produces less because it's more expensive to make its product and consumers buy less of it. And if they produce less, the firm needs fewer workers. Tariffs, especially on inputs like steel and aluminum, can end up costing more jobs in other industries than they save in the protected industry. And those jobs saved in that protected industry, remember, come at a huge cost. A tariff is a tax with the entire incidence on the American consumer. Now, keep the idea of tariffs in mind over the next few modules. We'll discuss the impact of special interests and why policies that hurt millions of consumers still get enacted when they benefit a small number of well-connected people. As I said, we'll talk about how firms are affected by input prices. And we'll delve into labor markets in a later module and think about how the demand for goods impacts the number of people employed in that industry. Now, there's a lot more to international trade than just tariffs. It's an absolutely fascinating field of study, and we offer a class on this topic in the Econ department if you're interested in learning more.